You know what's funny about family? They're supposed to love you unconditionally, stand by you through thick and thin, be there when you need them most. But sometimes, the people who are supposed to care about you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. And sometimes it takes losing your memory to truly see who your real family is. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I share real stories from real people about family, relationships, and life's unexpected twists. Today's story is particularly close to my heart because it's about a mother's journey through memory loss and the shocking discovery of who truly loved her. This is going to be a longer story, so grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive into this incredible journey that will challenge everything you think you know about family love. My name is Mary Elizabeth, but everyone's always called me Mary Beth. I'm 73 years old, and I've been married to my husband Robert for 47 years. Together we raised 4 children in our beautiful home in suburban Ohio. David is 45, our eldest son who became a successful lawyer. Sarah is 42, our firstborn daughter who works in marketing. Michael is 39, our third child who runs his own construction business. And Emma, our baby, who just turned 35 and teaches elementary school. For most of my life, I believed I was blessed with a wonderful, loving family. I thought I had raised 4 incredible children who would stand by me through anything. I thought Robert and I had built something beautiful together. A family that would be there for each other no matter what life threw at us. I thought wrong about 3 of them. Looking back now, I can see the signs were there long before my memory started failing. The way David would interrupt me when I was telling stories at family gatherings, rolling his eyes like he'd heard it all before. The way Sarah would check her phone constantly when I was talking to her, like she was just waiting for our conversation to end. The way Michael would only call when he needed something, money for his business, babysitting for his kids, or help with some project around his house. But Emma was different. Even as a child, she was the one who would sit with me in the garden while I tended to my flowers, asking questions about each plant and actually listening to my answers. She was the one who would help me in the kitchen during holiday preparations, not because she was forced to, but because she genuinely enjoyed spending time with me. She was the one who would call just to chat, not because she needed anything, but because she wanted to know how my day was going. I should have seen the difference then. I should have recognized that Emma's love was pure and unconditional, while the others' love came with conditions and expectations. But I was their mother, and I loved them all equally. I made excuses for their behavior, convinced myself that they were just busy with their own lives, that they cared about me in their own ways. It wasn't until my memory started failing that I truly saw who they really were. It all began about 3 years ago, though I didn't recognize it as the beginning at the time. I was at the grocery store, doing my weekly shopping like I had done every Thursday for the past 20 years. I had my list in my hand, written in my neat, cursive handwriting. Milk, bread, eggs, chicken breast, carrots, onions, tomatoes. Simple things I'd bought thousands of times before. But as I walked through the produce section, something felt wrong. I stood there holding a tomato, staring at it like I'd never seen one before. I knew it was a tomato. The red color, the smooth skin, the slight give when I pressed it gently. But I couldn't remember the word. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, trying to access this basic piece of information from my brain. Tomato, I whispered to myself finally, the word coming back like a door unlocking. It's a tomato. I laughed at myself, shaking my head. How silly to forget such a simple word. I was just tired, I told myself. I'd been up late the night before reading, and my brain was just a little foggy. It happens to everyone, but it didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, I started having what I called word moments. Times when I couldn't access words I'd known my entire life. I'd be talking to Robert and suddenly couldn't remember the word for scissors, or telephone, or refrigerator. I'd stand there, my mouth open, searching for words that seemed to have vanished from my vocabulary. Robert would supply the words patiently, and I'd laugh it off. Getting old, I'd say with a smile. My brain's just not as sharp as it used to be. But deep down, I was scared. These weren't just senior moments. These were gaps in my knowledge that felt bigger and more frightening than simple forgetfulness. The name forgetting started about 6 months later. I was at the post office, and Mrs. Henderson from down the street came up to me with a big smile. "Mary Beth, how wonderful to see you," she said warmly. I smiled back, recognizing her face immediately. I knew everything about her, that she had 3 grandchildren, that she volunteered at the animal shelter, that she made the most amazing chocolate chip cookies and always brought them to neighborhood gatherings. But I couldn't remember her name. "Hello there," I said, hoping she wouldn't notice my hesitation. "How are you doing?" We chatted for a few minutes about the weather and the neighborhood, and I managed to avoid using her name at all. But the whole time, I felt like I was wearing a mask, pretending to be normal, while inside I was panicking. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to remember her name. It was right there, just out of reach. I could picture her mailbox, could see her name printed on the side, but I couldn't access it. Finally, around 3 in the morning, it came to me. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson. I'd known her for 23 years. I started keeping a notebook after that, writing down names of people I encountered during the day. Mrs. Henderson from down the street. Tom the mailman. Janet at the bank. Dr. Phillips, my family doctor. I told myself it was just a precaution, a way to stay organized, but really it was because I was terrified of forgetting again. The first time it happened with my children was at Easter dinner. We were all gathered around the dining room table, Robert and me, the 4 kids and their families. 13 people total, including my 6 grandchildren. I had spent days preparing their favorite foods: honey-glazed ham, my famous potato salad, green bean casserole, dinner rolls from scratch, and 3 different pies for dessert. I was feeling proud and happy, surrounded by my family in the home where I'd raised my children. The conversation was flowing, the grandchildren were laughing, and everything felt perfect. Until I wanted to ask Sarah to pass the salt. I looked at her, my beautiful daughter with her auburn hair and bright green eyes, sitting just 3 seats away from me. I opened my mouth to speak, and nothing came out. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I couldn't remember her name. Sarah. Her name was Sarah. I'd named her after my grandmother, Sarah Jane, who had been the sweetest woman I'd ever known. I'd held this baby in my arms 32 years ago and whispered her name to her thousands of times. I'd called her name across playgrounds, sung it in lullabies, written it on birthday cards and school forms and Christmas presents. But in that moment, sitting at my own dining room table, I couldn't access it. "Could you?" I started, then stopped. "Would you mind passing the salt?" I finally managed, pointing in her direction. Sarah passed the salt without thinking twice about it, but David, my eldest, was watching me carefully. "You okay, Mom?" he asked. "You look a little confused." "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just tired." But I wasn't fine. I was terrified. If I could forget Sarah's name, what else could I forget? What other pieces of my life were going to slip away from me? The incidents became more frequent after that. I'd be talking to Robert and suddenly couldn't remember David's name. I'd be at Michael's house and draw a blank when trying to introduce him to a neighbor. I'd be playing with my grandchildren and forget their names mid-sentence. Each time it happened, I felt a little piece of myself disappearing. These weren't just names. They were connections to the people I loved most. They were proof that I knew who I was, who my family was, what my place in the world was. And each time it happened, my children's reactions told me everything I needed to know about who they really were. David was the first to start making jokes about it. We were at his house for his birthday party, and I was trying to tell a story about something that had happened at the grocery store. I wanted to mention that I'd run into his friend Jake, who I'd known since David was in high school. "I saw your friend," I said, looking at David. "You know, the one with the dark hair who used to come over to study with you." "Jake?" David supplied helpfully. "Yes, Jake," I said, relieved. "I saw Jake at the grocery store." David laughed. "Mom, you've known Jake for 25 years. How could you forget his name?" Everyone at the table laughed too. Even Jake, who was there at the party, chuckled and said, "Don't worry, Mrs. Thompson. I forget names all the time, too." But there was something different about David's laughter. It wasn't the gentle, understanding laughter of someone who empathized with an embarrassing moment. It was the laughter of someone who found my confusion genuinely funny. "Maybe we should make you flashcards," he said, still chuckling. "You know, like when you used to help us study for tests." More laughter around the table. I smiled and laughed along, but inside I felt humiliated. This wasn't funny to me. This was terrifying. Sarah's reaction was different but equally hurtful. She became impatient with me, sighing heavily whenever I'd pause to search for a name or word. "Mom, just say what you're trying to say," she'd say when I'd hesitate. "We don't have all day." Or she'd finish my sentences for me, not in a helpful way, but in an irritated way that made it clear she thought I was wasting her time. "I was talking to, the lady who lives," I'd start. "Mrs. Peterson," Sarah would snap. "The lady who lives next door is Mrs. Peterson. You've only lived next to her for 15 years. Michael's approach was to turn my memory problems into entertainment. He'd actually set me up sometimes, introducing me to people he knew I'd met before just to watch me struggle to remember their names. "Mom, you remember my contractor Bill, right?" He'd say with a smirk, knowing full well I'd forgotten Bill's name and would be embarrassed when I couldn't remember it. He'd also make bets with his wife about how many names I'd forget at family gatherings. I overheard him once at Christmas, whispering to his wife, "I bet she forgets at least 3 names tonight, easy money." But Emma never laughed, not once. Instead, she started doing something that nobody else seemed to notice at first. She started helping me, quietly, and without making a big deal about it. When I'd be struggling to remember someone's name, Emma would somehow work it into the conversation naturally. If I was talking to Mrs. Henderson and I could see that panicked look starting to cross my face, Emma would suddenly appear and say, "Oh, Mrs. Henderson, I was just telling Mom about that new restaurant downtown. She thought you might be interested." She'd give me the name I needed without making me feel stupid or embarrassed. She'd do it so smoothly that nobody else even noticed she was helping me. Emma also started calling me more often. Not just once a week like before, but almost every day. She'd call in the evening, when Robert was watching the news, and we'd talk for an hour or more. She'd ask about my day, my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the church. She'd listen to my stories, even when I'd tell her the same story I'd told her the day before. And when I'd forget words during our conversations, she'd wait patiently while I searched for them. She'd never supply them unless I asked, and she'd never make me feel rushed or stupid. "Take your time, Mom," she'd say gently. "I'm not going anywhere." Those phone calls became the highlight of my days. They were the only times I felt like myself, like I was still a person worth talking to, worth spending time with. But the contrast between Emma's behavior and her siblings' behavior was becoming more apparent every day. While they were treating me like a broken toy that was no longer fun to play with, Emma was treating me like a human being deserving of love and respect. The situation got worse when I started forgetting more than just names. I'd forget appointments, important dates, even how to get to places I'd been going to for years. I got lost driving to the library one day, a place I'd been going to for 30 years. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a shopping center I didn't recognize, crying because I couldn't remember how I'd gotten there or how to get home. I finally called Emma from my cell phone, and she came to get me immediately. She didn't ask questions about how I'd gotten confused or make me feel stupid for getting lost. She just hugged me and said, "It's okay, Mom. Let's get you home." She followed me home in her car, and when we got there, she sat me down at the kitchen table and made me a cup of tea. "Mom," she said gently, "I think maybe we should talk to Dr. Phillips about what's been happening. These memory problems are getting worse, and I'm worried about you." I started crying then, all the fear and confusion and embarrassment I'd been holding inside for months pouring out of me. "I'm scared, Emma," I whispered. "I'm so scared. I can't remember things I've known my whole life. I can't remember people's names. I got lost going to the library today. What's happening to me?" Emma held my hand and let me cry. She didn't try to minimize my fears or tell me everything would be okay. She just sat with me in my terror and let me feel what I was feeling. "We'll figure this out together," she said finally. "Whatever this is, we'll handle it together." I called David, Sarah, and Michael that night to tell them about getting lost and about my plan to see Dr. Phillips. Their reactions were telling. David's first response was practical, but cold. "Maybe you shouldn't be driving anymore, Mom. You could hurt yourself or someone else." Sarah immediately started asking questions about my insurance and whether I'd told Robert about the incident. "Dad needs to know about this," she said. "He needs to be prepared for what might be coming." Michael's response was the most hurtful. "Are you sure you're not just being dramatic, Mom? Everyone forgets things sometimes. You're probably just stressed." But Emma came over that night and sat with me while I waited for Robert to get home from his poker game. She didn't ask me to explain what had happened or question whether I was overreacting. She just stayed with me so I wouldn't be alone with my fears. The appointment with Dr. Phillips was scheduled for the following week. Emma offered to come with me, but I told her I could handle it myself. I wanted to believe I was still capable of managing my own medical care. Dr. Phillips had been my family doctor for 15 years. He was a kind man in his 60s who always took time to listen to his patients' concerns. But even he looked worried when I described what had been happening. "Mary Beth," he said gently, "I think we need to run some tests. What you're describing could be a number of things, but we need to rule out some possibilities." The tests were extensive and frightening. Blood work, brain scans, cognitive assessments, memory tests. I felt like I was being taken apart and examined piece by piece. The results took 2 weeks to come back. 2 weeks of waiting, of wondering, of being afraid to go to sleep because I might wake up having forgotten even more. When Dr. Phillips called me to come in for the results, I knew it wasn't good news. If the tests had been normal, he would have told me over the phone. Emma insisted on coming with me to that appointment. "You shouldn't hear this alone," she said, and I was grateful for her presence. Dr. Phillips was gentle but direct. "Mary Beth, the tests show that you're in the early stages of dementia, most likely Alzheimer's disease. The good news is that we've caught it early, and there are medications that can help slow the progression." The words hit me like a physical blow. Dementia. Alzheimer's. I'd watched my own mother go through this 15 years earlier, and I knew what it meant. I knew what was coming. Emma held my hand while Dr. Phillips explained the diagnosis, the treatment options, the prognosis. I heard maybe half of what he said because my mind was reeling. This was why I'd been forgetting names. This was why I'd gotten lost going to the library. This was why words had been disappearing from my vocabulary. My brain was literally deteriorating, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. When we left the doctor's office, Emma didn't try to cheer me up or tell me everything would be okay. She just held my hand and let me process what I'd learned. "What do you need right now, Mom?" she asked as we sat in her car in the parking lot. "I need to tell your father," I said, "and I need to tell your brothers and sister." "Do you want me to be there when you tell them?" she asked. I nodded. I was terrified of their reactions, and I knew I'd need Emma's support. That evening, Emma called David, Sarah, and Michael and asked them to come over. She told them I had something important to discuss with them, but didn't give them details. When they were all gathered in my living room, I took a deep breath and told them about the diagnosis. I explained what Dr. Phillips had said, what the tests had shown, what this meant for my future. The reactions were exactly what I'd expected, and exactly what broke my heart. David immediately started asking practical questions. "What kind of medication will you be on? How long before you can't live independently? Should we start looking at assisted living facilities?" Sarah wanted to know about the financial implications. "What will insurance cover? How much will this cost? Do you have long-term care insurance?" Michael's response was the most painful. "Are you sure about this diagnosis? Maybe you should get a second opinion. You seem fine to me." But Emma cried. She held my hand and cried with me, not because she was scared of what this meant for her, but because she was sad for what this meant for me. "I'm so sorry you're going through this, Mom," she said through her tears. but I want you to know that you're not alone. I'll be here for whatever you need." That night, after everyone had gone home, Robert and I sat in our bedroom talking about what this diagnosis meant for our future. "I'm scared, Robert," I told him. "I'm scared of forgetting you, forgetting our life together, forgetting who I am." Robert held me and promised that he'd be there for me through whatever was coming. But I could see the fear in his eyes too. We both knew what this disease could do to a person, to a family. Over the next few months, as my condition slowly progressed, the differences in how my children treated me became even more pronounced. David started talking about me like I wasn't in the room. He'd say things to Robert like, "How's Mom's condition today? Is she having one of her bad days?" As if I couldn't hear him or understand what he was saying. Sarah became increasingly impatient with me. She'd get frustrated when I'd ask her to repeat something or when I'd forget what we'd talked about earlier in the day. "Mom, I literally just told you this an hour ago," she'd say with exasperation. "You need to start writing things down." Michael started treating me like I was already gone. He'd make decisions about family gatherings without asking my input, talking to Robert about me as if I were a child who couldn't participate in adult conversations. But Emma did something different. She started spending more time with me, not less. She'd come over for coffee in the mornings, and we'd sit in my garden talking about flowers, books, memories from when she was a child. She'd listen to me tell the same stories over and over again, never once acting like she was bored or annoyed. She'd help me organize my medications, set up reminder systems, and she even hired a cleaning lady to help me keep the house in order when I started getting overwhelmed by household tasks. Most importantly, Emma treated me with dignity. She never made me feel stupid or broken when I'd forget something. She'd gently remind me of things without making me feel embarrassed. When I'd get confused, she'd patiently help me figure things out. Emma also started keeping a journal for me. She'd write down our conversations, family events, and things she thought I'd want to remember. She'd read it to me regularly, helping me stay connected to my own life even as my memory faded. The journal became one of my most treasured possessions. It was proof that my life mattered, that my thoughts and feelings were worth preserving, that I was still a person with a story worth telling. One day, Emma brought me a photo album she'd been working on. It was filled with pictures from throughout my life, each one labeled with names, dates, and brief descriptions of what was happening. "I thought this might help you remember," she said, sitting beside me on the couch as we looked through it together. There were pictures of me as a young woman, holding each of my babies for the first time. Pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, graduations, weddings. Pictures of quiet moments, me reading to my children, working in my garden, baking cookies with my grandchildren. As we looked through the album, I could see my life spreading out before me like a beautiful tapestry. Even when I couldn't remember the specific details of each photo, I could feel the love and joy that had filled my days. "You had a beautiful life, Mom," Emma said softly. "You still do." But the others didn't see it that way. They saw my diagnosis as the end of who I was, rather than just a change in my condition. They treated me like I was a burden to be managed, rather than a person to be loved. The contrast became even more stark when I started having what the doctors called sundowning episodes. In the late afternoon and evening, I'd become confused and agitated. I'd forget where I was, what year it was, sometimes even who I was. During one particularly bad episode, I became convinced that I was late for work at the elementary school where I'd been a teacher 30 years earlier. I put on my best dress and was trying to leave the house when Robert stopped me. "Mary Beth, you don't work at the school anymore," he said gently. "You retired 15 years ago." But I couldn't understand what he was saying. In my mind, I was 35 years old, and I had a classroom full of children waiting for me. I became increasingly agitated when Robert wouldn't let me leave. David happened to be there when this episode occurred, and his reaction was cruel. "Mom, look at yourself," he said harshly. "You're 73 years old. You haven't worked in 15 years. You have dementia. You're not going anywhere." His words were like slaps across my face. Even in my confused state, I could hear the contempt in his voice, the way he was talking to me like I was a misbehaving child. But Emma had a different approach. She sat down beside me and took my hand. "Tell me about your classroom, Mom," she said gently. "What were you planning to teach today?" Instead of trying to force me back to reality, she met me where I was. She let me talk about my students, my lesson plans, my love of teaching. She didn't try to convince me that I was wrong. She just listened to what I was feeling. Gradually, as I talked about my teaching days, the confusion began to clear. I started to remember where I was, what year it was, what was happening to me. But I also remembered the kindness in Emma's voice, the way she'd honored my confusion instead of mocking it. "You were a wonderful teacher, Mom," Emma said as my mind cleared. "Your students were lucky to have you." That night, I lay in bed thinking about the difference between how David and Emma had handled my episode. David had tried to force me back to reality through shame and harshness. Emma had guided me back through love and patience. I realized then that this was a preview of what was to come. As my condition worsened, I would have more episodes like this. I would become more confused, more agitated, more difficult to manage. And my children's true characters would be revealed in how they chose to handle those moments. Some would choose shame and impatience. Others would choose love and understanding. And I was beginning to understand that there was really only one who would consistently choose love. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more incredible real-life stories like this one, please consider subscribing to my channel. I share new stories every week about family, relationships, and life's unexpected twists. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me continue bringing you these powerful stories about real people facing real challenges. The next few months were filled with more incidents that showed me exactly who my children really were. There was the time I forgot how to use the microwave and stood in the kitchen crying because I couldn't figure out how to heat up my lunch. Sarah found me there and sighed heavily. "Mom, it's a microwave," she said impatiently. "You just put the food in and press the buttons." How can you not remember how to use a microwave? Her words made me feel stupid and helpless. I wasn't choosing to forget how to use appliances that I'd operated for decades. My brain was betraying me, and I needed patience and understanding, not criticism and frustration. But when Emma found me in a similar situation a few weeks later, struggling to remember how to work the coffee maker, her response was completely different. "Let's figure this out together," she said gently, standing beside me at the counter. "What do you think the first step should be?" She didn't take over and do it for me, which would have made me feel useless. Instead, she guided me through the process step by step, helping me remember how to do something I'd done thousands of times before. "You've got it, Mom," she said when I successfully made a pot of coffee. "See? You still know how to do this." There was the time I got confused during a family dinner and started talking about my mother as if she were still alive. My mother had died 8 years earlier, but in my confused state, I was telling everyone about a conversation I'd had with her that morning. "Mom's been dead for 8 years, Michael said bluntly. "You're talking about someone who's been dead for 8 years. His words hit me like a physical blow. The realization that I'd been talking about my dead mother as if she were alive was devastating. I felt the full weight of my confusion and the terror of losing my grip on reality. But Emma didn't correct me or make me feel ashamed. Instead, she said, "Tell me what Grandma said to you, Mom. I love hearing stories about her." She let me have my confusion without making me feel broken. She honored my memory of my mother, even when that memory was tangled up with my present reality. Later, when my mind had cleared and I realized what had happened, Emma was there to comfort me. "It's okay, Mom," she said, holding me while I cried. "Sometimes our hearts remember people even when our minds get confused about time. There's nothing wrong with missing Grandma." These incidents kept accumulating, each one showing me more clearly who my children really were. David, Sarah, and Michael saw my condition as an inconvenience, an embarrassment, a burden to be managed. They were impatient with my confusion, frustrated with my limitations, and increasingly absent from my daily life. But Emma saw me as a person who happened to have a medical condition. She adapted to my needs rather than expecting me to adapt to her convenience. She met me where I was rather than where she thought I should be. The turning point came when Robert had his heart attack. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was in the garden planting tulip bulbs when I heard him calling for me from inside the house. "Mary Beth," he called, and there was something in his voice that made me drop my gardening tools and run inside. I found him in the kitchen, clutching his chest and struggling to breathe. His face was gray and covered in sweat. "Call 911, he gasped. "I think I'm having a heart attack." I grabbed the phone with shaking hands, but when the operator answered, I couldn't remember our address. I stood there with the phone in my hand, knowing I needed to give them information to get help for Robert. But my mind was completely blank. "What's your address?" the operator asked. I looked around my own kitchen, the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, where I'd raised my children, where I'd lived for 32 years, and I couldn't remember where I was. "I don't know," I whispered into the phone. "I can't remember." Fortunately, our neighbor Mr. Peterson saw the ambulance from another call and came over to check on us. He was able to give the operator our address and help coordinate Robert's transport to the hospital. I rode in the ambulance with Robert, holding his hand and praying that he would be okay. But I was also terrified about what this meant for me. If Robert died, what would happen to me? Who would take care of me? Who would remember my address when I couldn't? At the hospital, I called all 4 of my children to tell them what had happened. Their responses to this crisis revealed everything about their characters. David asked immediately about Robert's insurance and whether his business affairs were in order. "Are all his accounts joint accounts?" he asked. "Is everything set up so you can handle the finances if something happens to him?" Sarah wanted to know about Robert's prognosis and how long he might be hospitalized. "I need to know if I should take time off work," she said. "How serious is this?" Michael's first concern was about the house and property. "If Dad dies, what happens to the house? Are you going to be able to maintain it by yourself?" But Emma's first words were, "Are you okay, Mom? Are you scared? I'm coming right now." She arrived at the hospital within an hour, still wearing her teaching clothes because she'd left school immediately when I called. She found me in the waiting room, confused and terrified, and she sat beside me and held my hand. "Tell me what happened," she said gently. I explained about finding Robert in the kitchen, about calling 911, about not being able to remember our address. I was embarrassed and ashamed that I'd been unable to help him properly in his moment of crisis. "You did exactly the right thing," Emma said firmly. "You called for help immediately. That's what saved Dad's life." But I felt like a failure. What kind of wife couldn't remember her own address when her husband was having a heart attack? What kind of person was I becoming? Emma stayed with me at the hospital all night. She helped me understand what the doctors were saying when I'd get confused. She brought me coffee and made sure I ate something. She held my hand during the long hours when we didn't know if Robert would survive. David, Sarah, and Michael came by the hospital, but none of them stayed long. They had work obligations, family commitments, things that were more important than sitting with their mother during the scariest night of her life. But Emma stayed. She slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside me, waking up every time I stirred to make sure I was okay. Robert survived the heart attack, but he needed surgery to place stents in his blocked arteries. The recovery was going to be long and difficult, and he'd need constant care when he came home. Emma immediately arranged to take time off work to help with Robert's care. She didn't ask me if I needed help. She just showed up and started doing what needed to be done. She organized Robert's medications, set up his recovery schedule, arranged for physical therapy, and helped me understand his dietary restrictions. She took care of everything that my confused mind couldn't handle. The others offered token help. David said he'd check in regularly. Sarah offered to coordinate with the doctors. Michael said he'd handle any financial issues that came up. But Emma was the one who actually did the work. She was the one who sat with Robert during his recovery, who helped him with his exercises, who made sure he was taking his medications properly. She was also the one who took care of me during this crisis. She made sure I was eating, sleeping, and taking my own medications. She helped me shower and get dressed when I became too overwhelmed to manage self-care. Most importantly, she never made me feel like I was a burden during this time. She never acted like taking care of me was a sacrifice or an inconvenience. She just loved me and cared for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. During Robert's recovery, something shifted in my understanding of my family. I realized that Emma wasn't just being kind to me. She was being the daughter I'd raised her to be. She was showing me the love and respect that I'd tried to teach all my children. The others had learned different lessons. They'd learned that parents were useful when they could provide money, babysitting, and support. But when parents became needy, when they required care and patience, they became burdens to be managed rather than people to be loved. Emma had learned that love is reciprocal. She'd learned that caring for family members is a privilege, not an obligation. She'd learned that people deserve dignity and respect even when they're sick, confused, or difficult. As Robert recovered and I watched how my children interacted with both of us during this crisis, I started thinking about the future. What would happen when I got sicker? What would happen when I needed more care? What would happen when I could no longer hide the extent of my confusion and memory loss? I looked at David, Sarah, and Michael, and I saw people who would do the minimum required to avoid feeling guilty, but who would never truly care for me the way Emma did, and that's when I made a decision that would change everything. 3 months after Robert's heart attack, when he was finally back to his normal activities, I made an appointment with our family lawyer, Mr. Davidson. I didn't tell anyone about this appointment, not even Robert. I needed to think through some things on my own first. Mr. Davidson had been handling our legal affairs for over 20 years. He'd helped us write our wills when the children were young, updated them when we bought the house, and revised them again when we started accumulating more assets for retirement. "Mary Beth," he said warmly when I arrived at his office. "How are you feeling? Robert told me about the heart attack. What a scary time that must have been for you." I appreciated his kindness, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He'd obviously heard about my diagnosis from Robert, and he was probably wondering if I was still mentally competent to make legal decisions. "I'm doing as well as can be expected," I told him. "My memory isn't what it used to be, but I still know what I want to do with my life and my assets." I explained to him what I'd been observing about my children's behavior since my diagnosis. I told him about the jokes, the impatience, the way they treated me like a burden. I also told him about Emma's kindness, her patience, her unconditional love. "I want to change my will," I said simply. "I want to leave everything to Emma." Mr. Davidson was quiet for a long moment. "Mary Beth, this is a significant decision. Are you sure you want to disinherit your other 3 children completely?" "I'm not disinheriting them," I said. "I'm rewarding the child who has shown me love and respect when I needed it most. I'm giving my assets to the person who has earned them through kindness and care." I explained my reasoning in detail. How David had turned my medical condition into entertainment. How Sarah had become impatient and frustrated with my limitations. How Michael had been more interested in my assets than in my well-being. "But Emma," I said, "Emma has treated me with dignity. She's loved me unconditionally. She's cared for me and Robert when we needed it most. She's the only one who deserves to inherit from me." Mr. Davidson asked me many questions to make sure I understood the implications of my decision. He wanted to be certain that I was making this choice with a clear mind and full understanding of what it meant. "Your current will leaves everything split equally among the 4 children," he said. "Are you prepared for the conflict this change might cause in your family?" "The conflict already exists," I told him. "The difference is that now there will be consequences for how they've chosen to treat me." We spent 2 hours going through every detail of the new will. I left everything to Emma: the house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, the life insurance policies, the family heirlooms. Everything Robert and I had worked for over our entire marriage would go to the one child who had truly loved me. I also asked Mr. Davidson to help me write letters to each of my children, explaining my decision. I wanted them to understand that this wasn't an impulsive choice made by a confused old woman. This was a deliberate decision made by someone who had been watching and evaluating their behavior for years. The letter to David was the hardest to write. My dear David, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and you will have learned that I've left everything to your sister Emma. I want you to understand why I made this choice. You are my eldest son, and I had such hopes for the man you would become. You are successful, intelligent, and capable of great things. But you are not kind. When I was diagnosed with dementia, instead of showing me compassion, you made jokes about my condition. You turned my medical struggles into entertainment for your friends. You embarrassed me in public and made me feel ashamed of something I couldn't control. You talked about me like I wasn't in the room, like I was already dead. You showed more interest in my assets than in my well-being. A son who laughs at his mother's suffering, who treats her like a burden, who sees her as an inconvenience rather than a person, doesn't deserve to inherit the fruits of that mother's life's work. I hope someday you will understand that love must be reciprocal, and that how you treat people when they're vulnerable says everything about your character. I loved you with all my heart, but you didn't love me back the same way. Love, Mom. The letter to Sarah was equally difficult. My dear Sarah, you were my first daughter, and I was so proud of the woman you became. You are strong, independent, and accomplished. But you are not patient. When my memory started failing, you became frustrated with me. You rolled your eyes when I'd forget things. You got impatient when I'd ask you to repeat information. You treated me like an inconvenience, like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. You were more interested in practical matters than in my emotional needs. You saw my condition as something that affected your schedule rather than something that was devastating to me. A daughter who sees her mother as a burden, who gets frustrated with her mother's limitations, who treats her mother's medical condition as an inconvenience, doesn't deserve to benefit from her mother's sacrifices. I hope you will learn that patience is a form of love, and that how you respond to someone's weakness reveals your true character. I loved you deeply, but you didn't show me the same love in return. Love, Mom. The letter to Michael was perhaps the most painful. My dear Michael, you were always my practical child, the one who could fix anything that was broken. But you couldn't fix me. And instead of accepting that, you treated my condition like it wasn't real. You made bets about my memory failures with your wife. You set me up to fail in social situations for your own amusement. You turned my confusion into a source of entertainment. When your father was in the hospital fighting for his life, you asked about inheritance and finances instead of offering support. You showed more interest in what you might gain from my death than in helping me while I was alive. A son who values money over his mother's dignity, who sees his mother's medical condition as entertainment, who treats his mother's suffering as a joke, doesn't deserve to inherit that money. I hope you will learn that respect must be earned, and that how you treat people when they're vulnerable is the true measure of your character. I loved you with all my heart, but you showed me that your love was conditional. Love, Mom. But the letter to Emma was a joy to write. My dearest Emma, you are the daughter every mother hopes to have. When I was diagnosed with dementia, you didn't see me as broken or diminished. You saw me as your mother who was facing a challenge, and you stepped up to help me face it with dignity. You never laughed at my confusion. You never made me feel embarrassed about my limitations. You never treated me like a burden. Instead, you treated me with patience, kindness, and respect. You helped me in ways that preserved my dignity. You loved me unconditionally, even when I couldn't remember your name. You cared for me and your father when we needed it most. You are inheriting everything not because you're my favorite, but because you're the only one who earned it through love. You showed me what family really means. You demonstrated that love is about caring for someone when they're vulnerable, not just when they're useful. You are getting the house where you spent countless hours making me feel safe and comfortable. You are getting the money that will help you build the life you deserve. You are getting the family heirlooms that you will treasure for their sentimental value, not their monetary worth. Most importantly, you are getting the knowledge that you made your mother's final years filled with love and dignity. Thank you for being the daughter I raised you to be. Thank you for showing me that true love is unconditional. Thank you for treating me like a person when others treated me like a problem. I love you more than words can express, and I am so proud of the woman you've become. Love, Mom. After I finished writing the letters, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For months, I'd been carrying around the hurt and disappointment of my other children's treatment. Now, I'd found a way to address it, to make sure there were consequences for their choices. I also made Robert the beneficiary of my life insurance policy during his lifetime, with Emma as the secondary beneficiary. I wanted to make sure he was taken care of if something happened to me first, but I also wanted to make sure Emma would ultimately receive everything. Mr. Davidson helped me set up a safe deposit box where I kept the new will and the letters. Only Emma would have access to the box after my death, along with Mr. Davidson. I didn't tell Robert about the changes immediately. I wanted to see how things continued to develop with my children. I wanted to make sure I was making the right decision. Over the next 6 months, my condition continued to slowly progress. I started having more frequent episodes of confusion, and I began forgetting more recent events while remembering things from decades ago with perfect clarity. The difference in how my children responded to my worsening condition was striking. David started visiting less frequently, and when he did come by, he'd spend most of his time talking to Robert about Mom's situation, as if I wasn't there. "How's she doing today?" he'd ask Robert while I was sitting right next to them. "Is she having a good day or a bad day?" "I'm right here," I'd say. "You can ask me how I'm doing." But David would just pat my hand condescendingly and continue talking to Robert as if I were a child who couldn't understand adult conversations. Sarah's visits became more focused on checking up on my condition rather than spending time with me. She'd ask me questions that felt like tests. "What day is it, Mom? Do you remember what we talked about last week? Can you tell me the names of your grandchildren?" When I'd struggle to answer her questions, she'd look at Robert with concern and say things like, "She's getting worse, isn't she? Maybe it's time to start thinking about more serious care options." Michael's behavior became increasingly focused on financial matters. He'd ask Robert about our investments, our insurance policies, our estate planning. He'd make suggestions about protecting assets and planning for the future. "Have you thought about setting up a trust?" he'd ask Robert. "You want to make sure Mom's medical expenses don't eat up everything you've worked for." But Emma's response to my worsening condition was to spend more time with me, not less. She started coming over every day after work, and we'd spend the evening together doing things that brought me joy and comfort. She'd bring photo albums, and we'd look through pictures of my childhood, my wedding, the early years of raising my children. Even when I couldn't remember the specific details of each photo, Emma would tell me the stories behind them, helping me stay connected to my own history. She'd also bring craft supplies, and we'd work on simple projects together. Making greeting cards for family members, arranging flowers from my garden, organizing my jewelry box. These activities helped me feel useful and productive, even when my mind was struggling with more complex tasks. Most importantly, Emma talked to me like I was still the same person I'd always been. She didn't test my memory or treat me like a patient. She just spent time with me, enjoyed my company, and made me feel valued and loved. One particularly difficult evening, I became convinced that I was late for my own wedding. I put on my best dress and was looking for my bouquet, becoming increasingly agitated when I couldn't find it. "Where are my flowers?" I asked Robert frantically. "I'm supposed to be getting married today. Everyone's waiting for me." Robert tried to explain that we'd been married for 47 years, that our wedding had been decades ago, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. In my mind, I was a young woman on her wedding day, and I was terrified of being late. David happened to be there during this episode, and his response was harsh and impatient. "Mom, you're not getting married today," he said loudly. "You got married 50 years ago. You're having an episode. You need to calm down." His words made me more agitated. I didn't understand why he was being so mean to me on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. But Emma approached the situation differently. She sat down beside me and asked gently, "Tell me about your wedding, Mom. What was it like?" Instead of trying to force me back to reality, she let me talk about my wedding day. I told her about my dress, my flowers, my excitement about marrying Robert. I described the church, the reception, the feeling of starting a new life with the man I loved. As I talked about that wonderful day, my agitation gradually decreased. The act of remembering and sharing those beautiful memories helped ground me and bring me back to the present. "It sounds like it was a perfect day," Emma said when I finished. "You and Dad have had such a beautiful marriage." By the time our conversation ended, I remembered where I was and what year it was. But I also remembered Emma's kindness, her patience, her willingness to enter my confusion with love instead of frustration. That night, I told Robert about the changes I'd made to my will. I explained my reasoning and showed him the letters I'd written to each child. Robert was quiet for a long time after I finished reading them. Finally, he said, "I think you're making the right choice, Mary Beth. Emma is the only one who truly loves you for who you are." He paused, then added, "I want to make the same changes to my will. Emma should inherit everything from both of us." So Robert met with Mr. Davidson and changed his will as well. Everything would go to Emma. Our house, our savings, our investments, our life insurance policies, our personal belongings. We also made Emma our power of attorney and our health care proxy. If either of us became incapacitated, she would be the one making decisions for us, not the other three. The decision felt right. Emma had already been acting as our primary caregiver, the one who truly understood our needs and wishes. It made sense to formalize her role as the person responsible for our care. 8 months after my diagnosis, I had what the doctors called a significant decline in my condition. I was hospitalized for 5 days with severe confusion and disorientation. The doctors adjusted my medications and said these episodes were likely to become more frequent and severe. During those 5 days in the hospital, the differences in my children's behavior became even more apparent. Emma never left my side. She slept in the chair next to my bed, helped me communicate with the doctors and nurses, and made sure I was comfortable and not scared. When I was too confused to remember where I was, she'd hold my hand and remind me gently that I was safe, that she was there with me. David visited once, stayed for about an hour, and left saying he had important meetings he couldn't miss. He spent most of his visit asking the nursing staff questions about my prognosis and treatment plan, but he barely spoke to me directly. Sarah came by twice, both times during visiting hours when it was convenient for her schedule. She'd ask me how I was feeling, but I could tell she was uncomfortable with my confused responses. She'd look at her watch frequently and seem relieved when visiting hours ended. Michael showed up on the last day, asking Robert about insurance coverage and what the hospitalization was going to cost. He seemed more concerned about the financial implications than about my well-being. "Are you sure insurance is going to cover all of this?" he asked Robert. "These medical bills can add up quickly." But Emma was there for everything. She helped me eat when I was too confused to manage it myself. She held my hand when I was scared and disoriented. She advocated for me with the medical staff when I couldn't advocate for myself. When I was discharged, Emma took 2 weeks off work to help me transition back home. She organized my medications, set up safety measures around the house, and arranged for a home health aide to check on me daily. She also created a schedule for herself to visit me every day, not because she felt obligated, but because she wanted to make sure I was okay and that I didn't feel alone or abandoned. The other 3 barely acknowledged that I'd been hospitalized. They didn't offer to help with my care, didn't check on my recovery, didn't ask if Robert needed support while managing my increased needs. This experience confirmed what I'd already known. Emma was the only one who truly loved me unconditionally. She was the only one who saw me as a person worth caring for, not just a problem to be managed. Over the next year, my condition continued to deteriorate. I started having more frequent episodes of confusion, and I began to lose some of my ability to communicate clearly. Simple tasks like getting dressed or making meals became overwhelming. Emma responded to my increasing needs by increasing her support. She started coming over twice a day, once in the morning to help me get ready for the day, and once in the evening to help me prepare for bed. She never made me feel like I was a burden. She never acted like caring for me was a sacrifice. She just loved me and took care of me like it was the most natural thing in the world. She also started documenting our time together. She'd take pictures of us working in the garden, looking at photo albums, or just sitting together on the porch. She said she wanted to preserve our memories, both for herself and for me. Even when your mind forgets, your heart remembers, she'd tell me. And I want to remember everything about this time we're spending together. The contrast between Emma's behavior and her siblings' behavior became so stark that even Robert commented on it regularly. "Emma's the only one who still sees you as you," he told me one evening. "The others act like you're already gone." He was right. David, Sarah, and Michael had essentially written me off. They saw my dementia as the end of who I was, rather than just a change in my condition. They treated me like I was already dead, like I was just a shell of my former self, waiting to be disposed of. But Emma saw me as the same person I'd always been, just with some challenges. She adapted to my condition, rather than expecting me to adapt to her convenience. She met me where I was, rather than where she thought I should be. 2 years after my diagnosis, something happened that crystallized everything for me. We were having a family dinner to celebrate Robert's birthday, and I was having a particularly difficult day. I was confused about where I was, what year it was, and I kept asking the same questions over and over again. Where are we? I asked for probably the 15th time. David sighed heavily and looked at his watch. "We're at your house, Mom. We've been here for 3 hours. You've asked that question about 20 times. But whose house is this?" I asked, genuinely confused and starting to panic. "Your house, Mom," Sarah said with obvious frustration. "You've lived here for 35 years. You picked out all the furniture. You planted the garden. This is your home." I looked around, nothing seeming familiar. The faces at the table looked like strangers. The room felt foreign and frightening. "I don't remember this place," I said, my voice rising with anxiety. "I want to go home. I want to go to my real home." Michael laughed, actually laughed at my distress. "Mom, you literally decorated this entire house. You spent weeks choosing that wallpaper. You're sitting in the chair you've sat in for dinner for 30 years. The laughter from my 3 oldest children was cruel and heartless. They were laughing at my confusion, at my fear, at my desperate need to feel safe and oriented. I felt like an animal in a zoo being mocked by visitors. I started crying, overwhelmed by the unfamiliarity of everything around me and the cruelty of my children's response to my distress. But Emma immediately knelt down beside my chair and took my hands in hers. "Mom, look at me," she said gently. "You're safe. You're with people who love you. I know everything feels strange right now, but you're safe." She didn't try to convince me that I was wrong about not recognizing the house. She didn't make me feel stupid for being confused. She just focused on helping me feel safe and grounded. "Would you like to go sit in your bedroom for a few minutes?" she asked. "Sometimes a change of scenery helps when things feel overwhelming." She helped me up from the table and walked with me to my bedroom. She sat with me on the edge of my bed and held my hand while I calmed down. "Tell me what you're feeling right now," she said. "I'm scared," I whispered. "I don't know where I am. I don't recognize anything. I feel lost." "I understand," Emma said. "That must be terrifying, but you're not alone. I'm here with you, and I'm going to stay with you until you feel better." She didn't leave me alone with my confusion and fear. She sat with me for an hour, talking quietly about gentle things, the flowers in my garden, the birds outside my window, memories of when she was a little girl. Gradually, as we talked, the familiarity returned. I started recognizing my own bedroom, my own belongings, my own life. But I also recognized Emma's kindness, her patience, her unwavering love. When we returned to the dining room, I could hear David, Sarah, and Michael in the kitchen, still making jokes about my episode. "She didn't even recognize her own house," David was saying. "This is getting ridiculous." "Maybe it's time to seriously consider assisted living," Sarah added. "She's clearly not safe living independently anymore." "The house is worth at least $500,000, Michael said. "If we sold it, we could afford really good care for her." They were talking about my life, my future, my home, as if I wasn't even there. As if I was already dead, and they were just managing my estate. But Emma was still holding my hand, still treating me like a person who mattered, still making me feel loved and valued. That night, after everyone had gone home, I had a long conversation with Robert about what had happened. "Did you hear them in the kitchen?" I asked him. "They were talking about selling the house, about putting me in assisted living, about managing my care like I'm already gone." Robert nodded grimly. "I heard them. They're more interested in your assets than in your well-being." "But Emma," I said, "Emma treated me like I was still a person. She didn't make me feel broken or stupid. She just loved me through my confusion." "Emma's the only one who truly sees you," Robert said. "The others see your condition, not you." That night, I felt more certain than ever that I'd made the right decision about my will. Emma had earned everything through her love, her patience, her kindness. The others had forfeited their inheritance through their cruelty, their impatience, their lack of compassion. Over the next few months, my condition continued to worsen. I started having more frequent episodes where I didn't recognize my surroundings or the people around me. I began forgetting how to do simple tasks like brushing my teeth or combing my hair. Emma responded to my increasing needs by arranging for more professional care while still maintaining her daily visits. She hired a wonderful woman named Patricia to help with my daily care, but she made sure I knew that she was still my primary support system. "Patricia is here to help with the practical things," Emma explained to me, "but I'm here because I love you and I want to spend time with you." The distinction was important. Patricia was kind and professional, but she was being paid to care for me. Emma was caring for me out of love, and that made all the difference in how I felt about myself and my situation. Emma also started creating what she called memory books, small photo albums with pictures of family members labeled with their names and relationships to me. When I'd forget who someone was, she'd show me their picture and remind me of who they were and why they were important to me. She never made me feel embarrassed about forgetting. She'd just gently provide the information I needed and help me reconnect with the relationships that mattered to me. The memory books became one of my most treasured possessions. They were proof that my relationships mattered, that my family was worth remembering, that I had a history and a place in the world. 3 years after my diagnosis, I had another major decline. I was hospitalized again, this time for a week, with severe confusion and agitation. The doctors said my condition was progressing more rapidly than they'd initially expected. During that week in the hospital, Emma's dedication to my care became even more apparent. She took time off work to stay with me around the clock. She slept in the hospital chair, helped me communicate with the medical staff, and made sure I was comfortable and not frightened. She also served as my advocate with the doctors and nurses, making sure they understood my needs and preferences. When I was too confused to speak for myself, she spoke for me, always with my dignity and comfort in mind. David, Sarah, and Michael visited occasionally during that week, but their visits felt obligatory rather than loving. They'd ask about my condition, but they seemed uncomfortable with my confused responses. They'd look at their watches, check their phones, and seem relieved when visiting hours ended. But Emma was present for everything. She held my hand during medical procedures. She helped me eat when I was too confused to manage it myself. She sang to me when I was agitated and couldn't sleep. Most importantly, she treated me like I was still the same person I'd always been. She talked to me about things I cared about, my garden, my grandchildren, my memories of raising my children. She didn't treat me like a patient. She treated me like her mother. When I was discharged from the hospital, Emma once again took time off work to help me transition home. But this time, she also had a serious conversation with Robert about my long-term care needs. "I think Mom needs more help than we can provide at home," she said gently. "I've been researching some really good assisted living facilities that specialize in dementia care." The conversation was difficult, but Emma handled it with such love and sensitivity. She wasn't trying to get rid of me or make her own life easier. She was genuinely concerned about my safety and well-being. "I want what's best for Mom," she said to Robert. "If that means she needs professional care, then that's what we should do. But I also want to make sure she knows that wherever she goes, I'll be there with her every step of the way." The decision to move me to assisted living was heartbreaking, but Emma made it bearable. She researched facilities carefully, visited them with me, and made sure I was comfortable with the choice. She also made sure the facility understood my needs and preferences. She provided them with detailed information about my history, my personality, my likes and dislikes. She wanted to make sure they saw me as a person, not just another patient. Most importantly, she promised that moving to assisted living wouldn't change our relationship. She'd still visit me every day, still spend time with me, still be my primary emotional support. "You're not getting rid of me," she told me with a smile. "You're just getting professional help with the things that are hard for you now. But I'll still be here for everything else." David, Sarah, and Michael were relieved about the move to assisted living, but for different reasons than Emma. They saw it as solving the problem of my care, as removing a burden from their lives. "Thank God," Sarah said when she heard about the decision. "I was so worried about Mom living at home with her condition getting worse." But her relief wasn't about my safety or well-being. It was about not having to worry about me anymore, not having to feel guilty about not helping with my care. Michael's response was to immediately start asking about the house. "So what happens to the house now? Are you and Dad going to sell it? It's worth a lot of money." Even David, who usually tried to appear more caring than his siblings, was clearly relieved to have me taken care of by professionals. But Emma was heartbroken about the move. She understood that it was necessary, but she grieved the loss of having me close by, of being able to take care of me in my own home. "I'm going to miss having you here," she told me as we packed my belongings. "But I'm going to visit you every single day, and we're going to make your new place feel like home." The move to Sunrise Manor was one of the hardest transitions of my life. Even though my memory was failing, I knew I was leaving the home where I'd raised my children, where I'd spent the happiest years of my life, where I'd built my identity as a wife and mother. But Emma made the transition as gentle as possible. She helped me decorate my new room with familiar items from home: my favorite chair, my photo albums, my grandmother's quilt, my collection of ceramic birds. She also established a routine of visiting me every day after work. We'd sit in the garden at the facility, look at photo albums, or just talk about whatever came to mind. She never missed a day, even when she was sick or tired or busy. The other children visited occasionally, but their visits felt obligatory. They'd come by on weekends sometimes, stay for an hour or two, and then leave. They'd ask how I was feeling, but they seemed uncomfortable with my confused responses. Emma's visits were different. She came because she wanted to spend time with me, not because she felt she should. She talked to me like I was still the same person I'd always been, just with some challenges. She also made sure the staff at Sunrise Manor understood who I was as a person. She provided them with detailed information about my history, my personality, my preferences. She wanted them to see me as Mary Beth Thompson, not just another dementia patient. "My mom was a teacher for 30 years, she'd tell them. "She loves flowers and birds and classical music. She's always been incredibly kind and patient. Even though she's confused now, she's still the same loving person she's always been." The staff at Sunrise Manor grew to love me, partly because of Emma's advocacy and partly because of the love she showed me during her visits. They could see how much I meant to her, and that made them want to take better care of me. 4 years after my diagnosis, I had my final major decline. I was hospitalized with pneumonia and severe confusion. The doctors weren't sure I would recover, and they prepared my family for the possibility that I might not survive. During what everyone thought might be my final days, the true nature of my children's feelings about me became crystal clear. David visited the hospital once, stayed for about 30 minutes, and spent most of that time asking the doctors about my prognosis. He didn't talk to me directly, didn't hold my hand, didn't offer any comfort or love. Sarah came by twice, both times asking practical questions about my care and what would happen next. She seemed more concerned about managing the situation than about being with me during what might be my final moments. Michael showed up once, asking Robert about funeral arrangements and what would happen to my assets. Even when I was literally dying, he was thinking about money. But Emma never left my side. She slept in the hospital chair, held my hand, and talked to me constantly, even when I was unconscious. She told me about her day, about the flowers blooming in the garden at Sunrise Manor, about memories of our time together. She also made sure I was comfortable and not in pain. She advocated with the medical staff for adequate pain management and gentle care. She wanted to make sure my final days were peaceful and dignified. "I love you, Mom," she whispered to me constantly. "You're safe. You're loved. You don't have to be afraid." Against all odds, I recovered from the pneumonia, but the experience left me much more confused and frail than before. I could no longer communicate clearly, and I needed help with all my daily activities. Emma's response to my further decline was to increase her visits to twice a day. She'd come before work to help me with breakfast, and again after work to help me with dinner and bedtime preparation. She never complained about the time and energy this required. She never acted like I was a burden. She just loved me and cared for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. The staff at Sunrise Manor were amazed by Emma's dedication. They told me regularly how lucky I was to have such a loving daughter, how rare it was to see such devotion and care. "Your daughter is an angel," one of the nurses told me. "She loves you so much. You can see it in everything she does." Even in my confused state, I knew she was right. Emma was an angel, and I was blessed to have her as my daughter. Now, as I sit here in my room at Sunrise Manor, looking out at the garden where Emma and I spend our afternoons together, I know I made the right decision about my will. Emma has earned every penny, every possession, every family heirloom through her love and devotion. She's the only one who truly sees me as a person rather than a problem. She's the only one who treats me with dignity and respect. She's the only one who loves me unconditionally, even when I can't remember her name. David, Sarah, and Michael will be shocked when they learn about my will. They'll probably say I was unfair, that I was too harsh, that I should have understood they were just trying to cope with my condition in their own way. But I understand perfectly. I understand that they were embarrassed by me. I understand that they saw me as a burden. I understand that they were more interested in my money than in my well-being. And I've responded accordingly. Emma will inherit everything because she's the only one who earned it through love. She's the only one who deserves it because she's the only one who truly loved me. The house will go to someone who spent countless hours there, making me feel safe and comfortable. The money will go to someone who cared more about my well-being than about my wealth. The family heirlooms will go to someone who treasures them for their sentimental value, not their monetary worth. If this story has touched you in any way, please consider subscribing to my channel and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes we need to be reminded that love should be unconditional, that respect should be mutual, and that kindness should be rewarded. Sometimes we need to be reminded that how we treat people when they're vulnerable says everything about who we are as human beings. Sometimes we need to be reminded that actions have consequences, and that love must be reciprocal to be meaningful. My name is Mary Elizabeth Thompson. And even though I forget names sometimes, I never forget love. I never forget kindness. I never forget who treats me with dignity and who treats me with derision. Emma treated me with dignity. She loved me unconditionally. She saw me as a person, not a problem. She cared for me when I was vulnerable, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. That's why she's getting everything. The letters are written and sealed, the will is updated and legally binding. When I'm gone, Emma will receive everything Robert and I worked for our entire lives. She'll get the house, the savings, the investments, the insurance policies, and all our personal belongings. She'll also get the knowledge that she made her mother's final years filled with love and dignity. She'll get the satisfaction of knowing that she loved someone unconditionally when they needed it most. David, Sarah, and Michael will get their letters explaining why they're receiving nothing. They'll learn that their laughter had consequences. They'll discover that treating someone like a burden has a price. They'll understand that love must be earned through kindness, not demanded through blood relations. They might be angry. They might say I was unfair. They might claim they loved me in their own way. But I know the difference between obligation and love. I know the difference between duty and devotion. I know the difference between someone who sees you as a person and someone who sees you as a problem. Emma saw me as a person. She always has, even when I couldn't remember her name, even when I couldn't remember my own name. And that's why she's getting everything, because love like that deserves to be rewarded, because kindness like that deserves to be recognized, because a daughter who treats her mother with dignity when she's vulnerable deserves to inherit everything that mother has to give. My memory may be failing, but my judgment isn't. I know who loves me and who doesn't. I know who treats me with respect and who treats me with ridicule. I know who sees me as a blessing and who sees me as a burden. Emma is my blessing. She's the daughter every mother hopes to have. She's the child who understood that when someone you love is struggling, you don't laugh at them. You help them. You don't abandon them. You support them. You don't mock them. You love them. So Emma gets everything. Because she earned it. Because she deserves it. Because she's the only one who truly loves me. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember to be kind to the people in your life who are struggling, who are vulnerable, who are different from who they used to be. You never know when you might need someone to see you as a person rather than a problem. And remember, how you treat people when they can't fight back says everything about who you are as a person. Emma chose love. I chose to reward that love. That's how it should be.